Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 17th of March 2024. We've got the military aid and equipment segment in the same video as a geopolitical segment. There's not a crazy amount of news today, just a normal amount of news. Okay, let's start with Ukraine facing a critical shortage of ammunition. Well, we knew that, artillery ammunition, that's on the way and seems to be at least somewhat improved. But there are reports indicating that will exhaust its air defense missile supply. So everyone's been scrabbling around getting artillery ammunition to Ukrainians. Meanwhile, they're expending huge numbers of missiles at taking down the Russian drones and whatnot. And this is something that would have been helped with that $60 billion aid package coming from the US. But obviously, without that arriving or being even passed through Congress successfully in the last 5 months, the Ukrainians desperately need their air defenses to be restocked. So this shortage decreases Ukraine's capability to intercept incoming Russian missiles by 60%, as according to the Daily Telegraph. Good news that Bulgaria's BTR-60s and I think some other equipment as well. There's some, if you notice, there's some tracked vehicles, a couple of four-wheelers, as well as the BTR-60s on the way there from Bulgaria through, I believe, Romania, or at least Romania is paying for the transportation. So that's should have been completed by now. That's going to be great news for the Ukrainians. They are going to certainly approve of getting that stuff. And on top of that, some more good news that some American M1117 Guardian armored security vehicles have finally arrived in Ukraine a year ahead of schedule. So the 425th Assault Battalion Scala posted a video on their social media of them using a vehicle in a training exercise. The US Senate Defense Appropriations Subcommittee have been pushing the DoD to figure out how to expedite the pending refurbishment work to get these vehicles ready. It's possible that Greece agreed to surrender some of their positions in the queue to facilitate this. So I don't know what the ins and outs are, but these were supposed to be being refurbished and then getting to Ukraine an awful lot later than they evidently have done. Here's the training video of the Ukrainian soldiers using one of those Guardian APCs. The American M1117 has appeared in service in Ukraine for the Scala assault battalion. 250 of these were promised to be delivered to Ukraine back in 2022. Not promised to be delivered in 2022, but were promised in 2022. The number delivered so far is unknown, but that could be some good news for the Ukrainians. Okay, let's go on to French assistance. A third field hospital container of equipment will be delivered to Ukraine. To date, €92,000 has been raised with a new target of 94,000 this weekend. Additional donations will enable the delivery of humanitarian equipment. This is coming from, I don't know, helloasso.com. So this is more not a government provision, but humanitarian aid coming from France. And here we have another example. The Hospital of Besançon is sending 12 tons of equipment to the region of Kharkiv. Look at that, SHCHYN. Nobody in their right mind invents a language that does that, except apparently they do. But I'm not going to say it. I just refuse. I'm going to power to the simple English speakers or something. I don't know. That sounds a bit dodgy. Anyway, no, I fully engage with diversity of linguistics. So in the region of Kharkiv, good stuff, French. This is Ukrainian kamikaze drone, the Elf, just going through a number of newly created drones and pieces of equipment the Ukrainians are working hard to produce. This is about $5,100 in the making. Range of 100 kilometers, a 2.5 kilogram warhead. So this is not a big warhead. This is about I don't know, it might be more explosive, but the weight of the warhead is about the weight of an RPG-7 on maybe a little bit heavier on an FPV drone. So you can imagine it could do some damage to a vehicle, that kind of thing. I mean, but it's not huge. You would 100 kilometers. I don't know what sort of thing you would target, but nonetheless, useful. It's horses for courses. You need different drones for different missions, and here is something else to add to the repertoire there. Okay, talking of drones, Ukraine's Magura V5 naval drones are successful in sinking Russian ships, aim for upgrades to improve defense against helicopter and ship armament during suicide missions, enhancing their capabilities in challenging Russia's Black Sea fleet dominance. So I've talked about this previously, that they are planning on getting air defenses on board these. I don't know whether they'll be just a number of manpads launchers, which are normally man-portable air defense systems, but of course there'll be drone portable, maybe DAN pads, because that's dro pads. Oh, give over, Piers. Right, but anyway, so that's that capability. But also, there's talk about getting these to go underwater if necessary. Now, that's really a very cool capability, because imagine you've got 5 of these approaching a warship, and the warship is hammering. The main defense a warship has are these sort of big machine guns, and they'll be hammering the water trying to take out these drones. Well, if the drones can, for the last, I don't know, 100 meters, go under the water like a sort of torpedo, if they have that diving ability, then that really adds to what they should be able to do. So interesting if they succeed in creating drones that can do that. This is an interesting long article in Euromaidan Press detailing the kind of evolution and the work on these Magura V5 drones to get anti-air and dive capabilities. So, wow. And then, I don't know if you remember, we had this issue back in London where they were introducing a scrappage scheme for older, more polluting vehicles, and you get however many £1,000 back if you scrap your old car to buy a new car, and that also stimulates new car manufacturing, etc., etc. But due to some legal regulations, due to how the agreement was written, there were these calls for those vehicles that were going to be scrapped to be sent to Ukraine. They said, we can't do that because actually it would be against the regulations we set out. And then lots of people had a go at the mayor of London, but actually the mayor of London came out and said, well, okay, if we can change the rules, let's do it. So actually it had to go to the, I think, transport minister, so the Conservative minister, who then had to change the rules. And then I know that Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, got a lot of hassle for that, but actually technically it was more to do with the regulations. Anyway, they changed the regulations. The upshot is they changed the regulations, and now this has turned up. So this is really good. So you get payment from Transport for London up to £2,000 for a car, or instead offer to donate it to Ukraine for humanitarian and medical purposes. Vehicle owners have to make an extra application to British Ukrainian Aid, a charity working with TfL. If approved, volunteers will pick up the vehicle and drive it across Europe so it can be used in relief efforts. Ukraine is short of vehicles, particularly near the front line where ordinary cars and trucks are needed. So that's really good news that finally seems to be happening. And then just a little note here from a German who has Stefan Heinzmann, who's replying to my appeal for some opinions about what's going on with Germany with regard to tourist voting and whatnot. Jonathan, you were asking for comments from Germany about the discrepancy between the tourist-related voting of the coalition parties in the Bundestag. So if you remember, the Bundestag had these sort of resolutions or bills or whatever it was that was attempting to be passed, and the ones that were brought forward by the opposition parties like the CDU were getting voted down, even though the people in the Bundestag who are in the coalition government were actually in favour of tourists being used or being sent to Ukraine. They were voting down these bills primarily because of politics, and you vote down opposition bills because otherwise it gives them strength, politically speaking, if they're going to get their own kind of bills passed and whatnot. Anyway, after that happened, and it's happened a number of times, in the European Parliament, members of the ruling coalition government who were members of the European Parliament, so we call them MEPs, so MEPs in the European Parliament voted for tourists to be given in some, I don't know how, I don't know what the vote was, why that was coming up in European Parliament, but there's this disparity between what's going on in the Bundestag from the SPD, Greens, and the other coalition partner, and what's going on in the European Parliament with those same parties, right? Anyway, here's an explanation. He said, "Here's my take on this. Needless to say, it is a subjective opinion with no presumption of correctness. I'm just a normal citizen with no special insight behind the curtains. But thank you for this, Stefan, and thank you for your really eloquent comment here. Observe Observe how the Chancellor Scholz and the Defence Minister Pistorius, both from the same party, SPD, have been at odds over the topic of Taurus missile deliveries to Ukraine right from the start. This is true. One inevitably wonders what Scholz knows that the responsible minister doesn't. Is Pistorius being kept away from important background information? And if so, why? Scholz has been very hesitant to offer any justification at all until he couldn't avoid giving some more insight into his reasoning. So he now says that he wouldn't be okay for the German soldiers to be involved directly with Taurus operations striking Russian mainland, all the while others don't see where this somewhat arbitrary red line comes from, including people from his own party. Recently, it became clear that the German military doesn't quite understand that either, given that soldiers from other countries are already involved in similar operations without apparent problems. Well, I think it's almost slightly worse than this. So the company that actually manufactures the missiles come out and said you don't need people over there, and also there's been this idea of like the computing power, meaning that there needs to be some kind of infrastructure within Ukraine to be able to use the better mission preparation for the Taurus usage. But then other people have said, well, actually, this is 20-year-old tech. Like, yeah, it does need some more computing power, but you don't need. It's not like crazy. And so, all the arguments that Scholz brings up as not to send the Taurus appear to be very poor arguments, but also, as Stefan rightfully points out here, well, if the guy who knows arguably more about Taurus, like the defense minister, is up for sending them, and Scholz, the chancellor, isn't, and he's coming up with these crappy excuses, like, what does he know that the defense minister doesn't know? Why does the defense minister advocate the use of these and not the chancellor? Anyway, so Scholz is the boss of our government in Germany and thus enjoys what we call Richtlinienkompetenz. In German, i.e., the authority to lay down the government guidelines for all ministers to follow. He can effectively overrule even a majority of opponents within his own cabinet. It appears that's what he's doing. If ministers wouldn't comply, the government would most likely fall apart. Therefore, the coalition parties and the government ministers are dancing around this red line in order to avoid a major government crisis, while at the same time making it clear their disagreement with Chancellor Scholz. It is really a peculiar spectacle, making people wonder what's going on behind the scenes and why Scholz is risking that much of a dissonance in both his government and his party, bringing it close to a breaking point. What's in it for him, one inevitably wonders. Of course, members of the European Parliament aren't exposed to those internal forces within the German government, so these they aren't cabinet members, and they don't have to fall in line with the Richtlinienkompetenz. So they don't have to, they're not liable to be overruled by Scholz in order to keep kind of like a coalition government together. So they're in the European Parliament and they can vote how they like. So you can assume that the Bundestag members would vote similarly if they weren't bound by the need to protect the government from disintegrating. Effectively, Scholz is putting his whole government on the line over this issue, which goes to show that it must be of considerable importance for him. That's a really good point. Like, for him to still be holding out, given the pressures that must be bubbling underneath the lid in the cabinet and in the coalition government, he must really, really want Taurus not to be sent. You don't risk blowing up the coalition for a minor issue. Hence, I think it's safe to say that the way the vote went in the European Parliament is an indication of how it would go in the Bundestag if people there weren't restricted by having to keep the coalition going. Given the meagre public rationale of Scholz for his stance, people wonder what more is going on behind the curtains. I personally have long started to wonder whether there's compromat in the hands of Russian secret services. I was wondering exactly this when I was reading through this originally. Like, I was thinking they must have something on him, or there are some historical ties, very strong ones, with the SPD to Russia. And that is still evident to some degree within the SPD as it rules or partly rules. Anyway, he says that there could well be compromise which allows them to pull Scholz's strings. I'm horrified by the thought that we might be governed by a Russian puppet. Really interesting. Like, so he seems to be doing enough, but just not going that final mile. And it's going to be something to do with the Kerch Bridge and the idea that the Russians would definitely not want the Kerch Bridge to be taken out, which is what probably would happen if the Ukrainians got the Taurus. So, is there compromise? What is going on behind the scenes there? And I just want to talk a little bit about another comment here, or read another comment here from someone else as we move on to the geopolitical section. Good morning from Germany. Again, I just listened to ATP's excellent summary of Macron's strong interview concerning Ukraine. Some might not know, but France has one of, if not the best, intelligence services in the world. Absolutely. Is it what, DGSI? Um, France and Germany are at the center of Russian cyber war and hybrid war in the EU. Several studies have proven this. Among others, the Green Party in Germany has had a study done which showed that over 500,000 social media accounts focus exclusively on spreading anti-green propaganda. It's what I was talking about yesterday. I think is it Bertold like misinterpreted me, saying that the Greens are so strongly behind um, Ukraine and supporting Ukraine because of the whole hydrocarbons thing. No, it's more involved than that, and this is what I was referring to really. So the Greens have been hit big time by Russian cyber warfare, or more pertinently hybrid warfare, accurately hybrid warfare in the information space. So the Greens support Ukraine more than any other party in this country, and also the arch enemy of the far right. I'm sure that the French intelligence services have much more information about Russia itself and its cyber war activities than we know. It should also be clear that Russia's goals go far beyond the Donbass and Luhansk. Even far right Le Pen made a flaming speech against Russia the other day, calling Russia a clear aggressor. I would say it was a bit more nuanced than that, but yeah, that was a 180-degree turnaround for her. So things are boiling in France right now. By the way, one should not forget the widespread and disgusting Russian military activities in Africa, which go almost unnoticed here in Europe, although not in France, no doubt. Now, I think someone else was saying in another comment that the German Greens, although traditionally like Green politics is generally far left, they've adopted more of a centrist stance in Germany as a result of the political landscape there. Let me know if that is the case, rather than being a kind of far left party. Now, going on to Macron's, not his discussion on TV, what was it, a couple of nights ago now, and then the subsequent meeting in Berlin. But I think he's been on television again doing some talking. So he really is hitting the airwaves at the moment and putting Ukraine front and center, which I think is fantastic. And not enough leaders are doing this. It's just fallen off the agenda for many news organizations. And I think this is a huge shame. So the president of France, Macron, gave an interview to Ukrainian media. His main points were on the role of France and his words on troops in Ukraine. The role of France in the war in Ukraine is what Churchill has called the nerve of war. We must bear collective responsibility. We are ready for any challenge, and if there comes another wave of escalation from Russia, we will be ready to react for the security of Ukraine and Europeans. But France will never initiate any kind of aggression. Ukraine must have clear visibility of the military aid calendar and walk confidently up to the moment when negotiations become possible. So interesting talk about negotiations and whatnot. And on aid to Ukraine, I will go to Berlin, speak to Chancellor Scholz and Prime Minister of Poland. I'm confident we will be able to allocate extra finances. So this interview was obviously recorded prior to him going to Berlin. We don't have limits. We will react to how Russia reacts. I'm not going with advancing initiatives yet, because this is not the spirit of collective solidarity. And then on negotiations with Putin, if Putin wants to offer something, I will answer his phone call. But the true negotiations about the end of the war must be held by Putin and Zelensky. In other words, this is a problem with Trump saying, I will force them to the table. It's a completely different approach here. It's like, it's their country. They're the ones that do the negotiation about their future with Russia. It's not up to us to dictate to them. But, I will answer his phone call. So I will help. Putin wants to offer, I'll answer the phone call, and I will help Zelensky, with what he needs. But this is Zelensky and Putin's deal to be made. Whereas, as I say, Trump is just completely opposite to that. Ukraine should go to the point when negotiations will be possible, but the territorial integrity of Ukraine will be a fundamental value, says Macron. This is really important because Canada's reiterated, Justin Trudeau has reiterated that, quote, the territory of Ukraine will remain the territory of Ukraine, and we will continue to support Ukraine for as long as necessary. Talking also about, I think it was Crimea particularly, which I think is really, really important. That Allied nations come out and very explicitly talk about 1991 borders, very explicitly talk about particularly Crimea. Euromaidan press, saying that Russia will be asked to observe ceasefire in Ukraine during Paris Olympics, said French President Emmanuel Macron. Earlier, I don't know. I need to look into this more because this seems like against what he was just saying. And ceasefires. I was thinking about this earlier because he wouldn't say there should be a ceasefire unless it's something that Ukraine would want. So traditionally, the ceasefire idea has been one that would benefit Russia the most. But I wonder whether there's a point where a ceasefire might benefit the Ukrainians more at some point, and whether there's been some discussions with Zelensky and the Ukrainian military as to the timing of the Paris Olympics and whether that would be a really good time for the Ukrainians to have a ceasefire. I don't know, but I'd be surprised that Macron has just said all of what he's just said and then gone somewhat against that with saying, and then there should be a ceasefire for the Olympics. So just be careful if you're going to just go out full out and criticize him. Remember, he's already said he's very careful with his words. So what has gone on there? Let's try and understand why he's saying that. Earlier, International Olympic Committee, which France doesn't control, right? Even though the Olympics will be in Paris, allowed Russian athletes to participate in the Olympics, a decision that Ukraine strongly criticised. I need to look into that, but the idea of them operating under neutral flags and whatnot, I didn't realise they'd made a formal decision on that. Anyway, moving on, Yulia Navalnaya, so Alexei Navalny's wife or widow, accused Orban of complicity in Putin's crimes during a video message at a protest rally in Budapest against the Hungarian government. She emphasised that Putin has European friends who cover up his crimes, and Viktor Orban is one of them. This is really good. There is a little bit of unrest going on in Hungary at the moment. Tens of thousands of people joined an anti-government rally organised in Budapest by Peter Magyar, a former insider of Hungary's ruling Fidesz party. So he's formerly of Fidesz. The businessman addressed the crowd on March the 15th, marked as Hungary's national holiday day. I mean, this is incredible. You've got here, just worth just pointing this out. In fact, we'll go through everything that's said in this because I think it probably is important. We'll read to you some of the opinions of the people here. So, as this first person says, I've had enough of the past 14 years. That's what I'm protesting. And this is a long time of having the Fidesz party in charge now. Every year, the Fidesz party spends hundreds of billions of Hungarian forints on propaganda, and this is absolutely true. And some of that goes to the Bethany Foundation that ends up in the Heritage Foundation. So literally some of the Hungarian propaganda money, which you can also trace back to Russia. So you've got money coming from Russia to Hungary and then going from Hungary to certain foundations in Hungary, from the Hungarian government to certain foundations. And those foundations fund the Heritage Foundation, which is a US conservative think tank organization that organizes CPAC and is behind Project 2025, which is a blueprint for a Trump government. And you're like, they're getting funding from the propaganda department of the Fidesz party in Hungary. Holy crap. And this is the influence in American politics, in international politics that Russia and even Hungary are having. Every year the Fidesz party spends billions on propaganda, he says. Despite this, believe me, they can be defeated in elections. I mean, that's a challenge. When you're fighting against a country that controls the mechanisms and the messaging, you are up against it. I've argued this. I've written some big articles on this in the past in Britain, because this is the case in Britain, right? How many progressive TV stations, progressive left TV stations or news stations are there in Britain? Precisely none. You've got the centrist BBC, you've got the centrist Sky News, which is slightly centre-right. Then now you've got Talk TV and GB News, who are much further to the right. And you've got no one for the left. You've got Novara TV on Novara Media on YouTube, yeah, but there's no TV. And then when you look at print media, it's even worse. So you've got the Guardian, which is left. It's not crazy progressive left though. It's just basically centre left. And you've got the Mirror, which is a tabloid newspaper that steers away from controversial things like Brexit because it knows a lot of its working class voters voted Brexit. So stuff like that is just interesting. You've got the Mirror and the Guardian, and then that's it. You got the Independent in the centre, but it's not no longer print art print media. And then you've got, goodness me, you've got the Daily Mail, Daily Express, Sun, Telegraph, Spectator, Financial Times, Times. All of those sit centre right to right, and the readership of all those absolutely swamps the readership of those two newspapers that sit on left. I go to my local newsagents, right? And yes, it's a South Coast, very kind of conservative area. And there is honestly a pile of Daily Mail that's higher than my body, right? And there's like two Observers or two Guardians. And so it's just like, wow. So the control, I did it when I debated Brexit in the media after the Brexit debate and looked at media reports and analysis, demographical analyses and newspaper analyses and how it was reported. It's just really interesting that the right controls the messaging in the UK. You might not think it, and those on the right will be spitting at the screen now, but just go and look at the actual facts. If you look at the readership facts, like of those newspapers and their reach, certainly in print, is undeniable, right? So the readership is vastly in support of the right. They control the media environment and therefore the narrative that gets pumped out to the people. And so if you control the message, then you control much of the information that people are getting, which means people are living on an unbalanced diet of information. Now, that's a problem in the UK, and we have a much fairer democratic system. Now you go and transpose that onto somewhere like Hungary, where they completely control the media environment and the mechanisms, and so you're wondering whether the elections are fairly monitored and for those democratic election criteria are fulfilled. Is there corruption? What's going on there? The issues that we don't have in the UK, but are evidently much worse. They do have them in Hungary and are adding to the difficulty of people voting in a government to replace Fidesz. It's a real challenge. Sorry, this is quite a big sidebar. I'm fed up with the nepotism. I'm fed up with the entire way they run this country, says another. I'd like to see a new face, new names, new faces, a new force, new names, new faces. Young people who are qualified, have experience from abroad and challenge the current system. Absolutely. Totally agree. It is a problem, but it's good to see that there are protests taking place. Now, I find it interesting that the British defence chiefs are now facing calls to ban the video sharing app TikTok amid fears that sensitive data could be useful to Chinese spies. This has just happened in the US. There's been a really solid bipartisan agreement here. And there are some critics of that. Not that it's happened, but the fact that Ukraine aid has been stuck for frickin' 5 months in Congress, and yet a TikTok bill passed within a week. They're like, yeah, let's get on and do that. Yeah. And that's how desperately partisan Ukraine has become. And it's just so unfair that it's become partisan in the States. Grant Shapps was forced to abandon a trip to Odessa. The news has come out when he was over in Ukraine recently, after British intelligence revealed there was a credible threat he could be targeted in a Russian missile strike. Wow. So interesting stuff. Now, going on to American politics, I'm not going to play you what he says here, but Trump's just come out and had actually another fairly bizarre public speech where he's just like, he is in cognitive decline, or he's under so much pressure with legal stuff that his brain is short-circuiting. It just doesn't make hardly any sense anymore. But anyway, he did talk quite a bit about Ukraine, and not in a good way, really. Although there's one thing that he's like now talking about loans to Ukraine, so there is like a path forward, maybe. But he's also taking the piss out of Zelensky, and when you're doing that to an audience that is applauding and whatnot, it's just it's just horrible. Like if you're still a listener out there who's trying to defend Trump with regard to Ukraine, like try and defend him with regard to anything else, and we can have that argument. But when it comes to Ukraine, I don't think we can have that argument. Like you're just deluded if you think this guy in any way supports Ukraine. Trump doubts Ukraine will survive. Quote, if they make it, they're against tremendous odds. Tremendous odds because you've got your guys not to pass an aid bill for 5 months through Congress. Oh, look, they're really struggling. Oh, what a bunch of losers. I wonder why that is. Oh, yeah, because you've got your guys to stop. You got the guys to stop them for 5 months in Congress. Yeah, but look at them now. Oh, losers. Yeah, but you're the one that made. I mean, do you see this circular? Look, He then mocked the Ukrainian president. Zelensky, quote, Zelensky is the greatest salesman in history. Every time he comes to the country, he walks away with 50 or 60 billion. No, he doesn't. 5 months he hasn't. And he went there to try and get some aid going, and it doesn't seem to work. So ostensibly, you're wrong. And as this thread says, Putin's puppet. Trump lies about Ukraine aid. Most of the money stays in the USA. So again, stuff that he's saying as well at these events is just ostensibly incorrect as well. So just real problem there. And as someone says here, it's heartbreaking to see a world leader belittle a country fighting for its survival. Trump's comments are insensitive and show a lack of empathy for the people of Ukraine. He's famously lacking in empathy, Trump. Like Navalny dies and he makes the whole thing about him. Any terrible thing that happens, it's all about how wonderful he's been in responding to it. He never says things that are nice and caring about other human beings. You tell me when he's been genuinely caring and empathetic, like in a way that other people are, like in a way that even Biden is, right? He's just not like that. He's not empathetic because he's a sociopath. The situation in Ukraine is serious and should not be trivialized for political gain. As a global leader, Trump should show more respect and support for nations in need. Fricking yes. I want to swear here. I almost use the F word, the proper one then, because I think it's fairly disgusting, actually, his approach and the stuff he says and his self-absorption. When you've got a country, just go and visit there, mate. Go and see the stuff that's taking place. Go and get genned up on the war crimes that are taking place in Ukraine and have some decency, some common decency. Trump should show more respect and support for those nations in need. These remarks only further highlight the need for diplomacy and compassion in international relations. As someone says, agree with you 100%. His behaviour is disrespectful and cruel. It's disgusting, and people in the crowd cheer him. Our country is no longer civilized. Ukrainians are fighting for their survival, and he mocks them. President Zelensky is 1,000 times a better man than this vile person. Now, that may be overtly anti-Trump, but for good reason, because just look at what Trump says and does. And interestingly, as Jack Smith says, 40 out of 44 of his cabinet members will not endorse him. So he might be super popular with this baying crowd of people over here. But if his vice president doesn't endorse him and 40 out of his 44 cabinet members won't endorse him, you've got to ask whether he's the right guy for the job. Many of his former staffers will not endorse him. Anyone who believes there are brighter days ahead for America will not endorse Donald Trump. The sheer magnitude of the non-endorsements from his past officials paints a bleak picture indeed. When 40 out of 44 cabinet members, a VP and numerous former staff members refuse to endorse, it's a sobering testament to the state of affairs. The absence of support from those who once worked closely with him speaks volumes. It's a sad indictment of the divisiveness and uncertainty surrounding Donald Trump's leadership. You can't argue with that. You can't. Anyway. We're living in the 1930s and people are making the same idiotic mistakes of ignoring what's coming. This is Dmitry Medvedev, so the Russian Prime Minister, a former president, casually saying that Latvia is not a legitimate state, and then follows up by issuing a death threat to the Latvian president. Russian imperialism must be stopped once and for all. So just before I read what Medvedev's actually said, go back to an event like this, with Trump speaking to this baying crowd, and understand that he's not coming out and saying, do you know what the Russian former president has said? That is utterly disgusting, and how we need to be strong against Russia. We need to be strong against rhetoric that is reminiscent of 1930s Nazi Germany. And if we don't, we are not doing what is good and right for the world. Like, if you are not saying that, but instead taking a piss out of Zelensky, who's fighting for the survival of his own freaking nation, then you are an absolute tool. So, Dmitry Medvedev, who does need to be called out in a public rally, said various Nazi bastards who wish death on Russia, like Rinkovich, the president of a non-existent Latvia, so he's denying Latvia's existence and then saying they must remember the fate of fascists. So he's calling him a fascist, effectively. The 1943 Kharkov trial included retribution is inevitable, memento mori. What's he talking about? He's talking about the hanging of fascists in 1943 and saying Rinkovich should be that and Latvia doesn't exist. Now, you've got that. Imagine that Biden came out and said that now about some other nation. Imagine he came out and said that. The absolute furore that would result. This guy says it. No one seems to bat an eyelid apart from you and I on frickin' social media. And yet he's at a rally at the same time Medvedev said that, and he's taking a piss out of Zelensky. It's not right. I mean, at least Ted Lieu's got it right, who's a congressman from the US. Putin attacked Georgia and was not stopped, so he attacked again. Putin attacked Crimea and was not stopped, so he attacked again. Putin attacked Kiev, and if he is not stopped, he will attack again. To those who think we can negotiate with Putin, please see below. And that seeing below is Latvia does not exist, says a senior Russian official. Noted. Medvedev. Again. Ugh. Just. Ugh. And then people trying to call him out on that, and he comes back Ted Lieu pretty well. So I don't know. I get myself angry because I can't believe that prospective president of the US is positioning himself in the way he does. I think it's deeply, deeply irresponsible. And there are still people on my threads who will try their hardest to defend him because they love Trump. They love Trump in so many other ways that I can't be wrong over here. Yes, he can. He can be deeply, deeply wrong here. In the same way that Musk can produce spaceships that look like they're pretty decent and do a good job with electric car manufacturing, but he can also be an absolute idiot. In fact, he's even worse now because he is just overtly, in fact, while I'm at it, the man is now literally appearing to side with an actual Nazi. An actual Nazi. Just, I don't understand Elon Musk. Anyway, you can surely be nuanced enough to say, look, he's doing well over here. I like what he does over here, but over here he's an absolute tool. The same applies to Trump. But the problem with Trump, more so, is that if you're running to be the president of the US, then your remit includes not being a tool in international diplomacy, in international global security. If you're a tool in that, then you shouldn't be president. So you need to be nuanced with how you look at Trump. Say, okay, I like his ideas over here, but over here this sucks. But also realise that by sucking over here, you shouldn't vote for him. You shouldn't be US president. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care. Speak soon.